Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. How's it going?
Good. It's a lovely hot day. The wind is blowing. But other than that, it's all good.
Well, that sounds lovely. I just have a big pile of melting snow out my window, so I could use some of that. But that's good.
Yeah. I'm actually honest. I can't remember what we agreed to talk about on Tuesday. I think the team's connectivity was so bad that day, which I think I finally what the problem was. It wasn't Teams' fault. It was my fault. I installed a Powerline network or Power of Ethernet connection from the router to where I'm working, but I left the Wi-Fi on my laptop as well, so that's connected to the mesh network. And where I am in the house, I've got like a little dead spot for some reason, and I've had to. And when you look at the order of network interfaces on the Mac, it shows the Ethernet one as the first one, and the Wi-Fi one as the second one. So I thought, in my mind at least, that because the Ethernet one's first, that's what it's using for everything. But it's not doing that. It's using whichever connection. It's got obviously just trying the connections, and it's flip-flopping between the two. So what happens is I lose because it's trying to get the Wi-Fi obviously isn't great here. So it kind of tries the Wi-Fi, then it fails, then it goes to the Ethernet, then it goes back to, for some reason, it goes back to the Wi-Fi. Anyway, so I turned off the Wi-Fi connection, and all of a sudden I've had no problems with Teams.
Well, glad you got to the bottom of it anyway. That's funny.
I've had Telcom out here. I wrote a script to do speed tests. And I was like, the weird thing is, I actually went and plugged this laptop into the router at the, right there at the wall, and I had the same problems. So it wasn't like, I couldn't see that there was any other problem than a problem with the actual line. But because it was still trying to connect to the Wi-Fi, I actually didn't take Wi-Fi out of the equation, which was the troubleshooting thing. And I should have actually just removed as many things as possible down to the simplest line, and then tested each one and then worked that way. And the minute I did that, it just worked. Now, the interesting thing on that is that now, since it's worked on the Ethernet connection, if I leave Wi-Fi on, it still works because it now definitely uses Ethernet as the main connection. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's some intelligence in the operating system, or it's just because I turned Wi-Fi on afterwards, it's got that order correct.
Interesting. I think this is actually a good conversation related to what we last Thursday had talked about, chatting about, which is the ROI of digital, of improving digital employee experience. So how many hours of productivity would you say you lost trying to figure out your Wi-Fi issues?
Too much. And I'm having another issue with Vodafone, which we can also talk about. And I was actually talking with Robin, and you'll see a LinkedIn post on this in my feed. It's not so much the technical loss that you find. Like obviously you lose time because your device is not working and it's going to be sluggish. Like for example, if I was trying to copy a Word document from Dropbox into Outlook, and because there was no internet connection or an unstable one, it would freeze the whole device because it was trying to download the Word document to put it into the Outlook email. So that not only costs me time while it freezes and then you got to kill everything to get it back up and whatever. But there's also the cognitive loss, which is what he brought up today in our conversation. And this is what I've posted on LinkedIn, because you're doing something and you're in the flow of doing something, and then your computer freezes. And now you have to stop thinking about, because now you've got to stop that flow to deal with the technical issue, and that could take you down a rabbit hole, and you actually forget what you were doing, which will take you 20 to 25 minutes to get back on track. And that's if you remember what you wanted to do next, because obviously that was in your head, so you haven't written it down or whatever it is. So that cognitive impact is actually quite large. Then you've also got the decision around what have you invested in order to make this environment work for you. So we've got a mesh network that we bring with us. We've got fiber here. That's all got costs associated with it. But if that thing doesn't work, I'm the only person who can fix it, because no one else in the family is technical. So I can spend a whole morning, 3-4 hours, testing things and walking around and whatever it is, to the point that I solve it, which I finally did, which was obviously quite. It usually is something small and silly, which solves the problem. But that 3 or 4 hours can be quite frustrating, because while you're trying to solve it, my wife's got to be on calls. My kids are trying to watch TV. Everything's on the internet. Everything's been streamed. And of course, I can't just turn the Wi-Fi off and on because I'm trying to test something, because they all want to use it. So there's a lot of those sort of cascading things that if you're in a corporate environment and, Wi-Fi is not going to be necessarily turned off and on, because there'll be change control, there'll be notifications and all that sort of stuff. But there's still an impact. And then once it all works again, then it's happy days. And you're like, why did it take me so long? And I probably lost, a good day across a week running around trying to sort things out and putting in, we've got a 4G router as well. So, I've got that as a failover now. So I spend money on that. So there's the cost of buying equipment for backups to solve, to keep everyone going and also being able to work. Because the other thing is you've got to work while you're doing all this stuff. So, there's many times where I was just working on something to solve the problem. And then I'm like, I've got to get on a call now. So now you got to stop, you got to do the call, and then you might have a few calls in a row, work to get done, and then you're like, okay, now I need to look at this thing. But you've got to now switch back into what you're looking at. So it's never simple, would be the summary.
Definitely. Well, you mentioned these kind of issues are less prevalent in a corporate environment, but I do think, yes, in the office, that's sort of one of the benefits, particularly from an IT side, is you have control over things. You don't have to worry about people's home networking issues. But obviously, a lot of organizations are still working in a remote or hybrid fashion, which means that to an extent is IT's job to help figure out if an issue is being caused by the employee's own network, when they're sort of troubleshooting issues like slowness on a device, which could be a really common but vague complaint too.
Hey, look, the tools we've worked with, and there's nothing more difficult than my computer's slow. As a starting point, I mean, you need to have telemetry. You need to have I sort of treat it as a Sherlock Holmes kind of case, where you've got to have a lot of pieces of information that you can put together to troubleshoot. And when you don't have those sort of tools, I mean, I've got old in-laws and parents and stuff, and I'll get the phone call, my computer's slow, and you're like, well, I don't have any telemetry to look at, so I can only ask the obvious questions. How old is the computer? How big is the hard drive? How much RAM you got? Is it a new computer? Is it an old computer? That very, very basic diagnostic questions. But when you got the telemetry, you can, in most cases, just look at a screen that's going to give you a couple early indicators of what the problems are. And you'll see disk space issues, or you'll see age of the computer, or they haven't rebooted the machine in a long time, or they've left a whole lot of applications running. All those sorts of things, which, for most people, that's not normally the problem. But I don't think people realize that there's almost a hygiene that you've got to have as well to using a device, rebooting it off and cleaning up your unused applications, clearing out disk space, clearing out your recycle bin, that sort of stuff. Speaking of which, I've just got a warning that my disk is full.
Oh, no. The worst.
The worst, which is quite funny because when I bought this laptop, which was supposed to be a personal laptop, not a work laptop, and I guess I'm buying a new laptop when I get back to London. I didn't think I would actually need more than 250 gig hard drive, but I fill it up almost every day with stuff that I'm doing. So clearly, there's something that I need to go and clean up now.
Probably a whole bunch of what?
Probably a whole bunch of photos that I've downloaded or something like that.
Yeah, every now and again I have to go clear out the old podcast recording downloads because those obviously take up a whole bunch of space.
That's probably what's happened is I use a tool called Hazel on the Mac, and what that's supposed to go and do is it's supposed to go and move all, there's different rules you set up, and it's one of the things it's supposed to do is move the recordings to another folder, and then that folder is in Dropbox, and Dropbox is told to keep that folder in the cloud only. But sometimes that process of moving the recordings means it downloads all the recordings that are there till they get moved, and that, a recording could be 500 meg, whatever it is. And I didn't realize it the other day, but I'd actually left a QuickTime recording on my screen going. So I recorded an entire day of stuff that I did. It was 35 gigs. And I couldn't work out why I'd run out of disk space. Well, that was why I ran out of disk space, because there was one file of 35 gig. And that's just the case of the silly user.
That is pretty funny. You should do something with that recording. I don't know what, but
I know, I just deleted it. I couldn't operate the machine because I was in the middle of doing something.
Yeah.
And it just, the whole machine just said, you're out of disk space. I was like, I can't be. There was like 100 gigs free earlier. It can't be. And then you can't do anything. And then I had to slowly delete things and close things off. And that was a great case of, because I didn't have a script to do the cleanup, I had to do it manually. And nurse it basically back to a running machine, then reboot it, and then work on it. But that takes away again cognitive load. I was busy in the middle of doing a presentation. I was, I was in a great flow, and then it all went to pot, and I had to start again. So
yeah, it's unfortunate when those things happen, and the context switching is a really big issue in the digital workspace today, I think. What about other, forms of ROI around improving digital employee experience? I think about even things like employee well-being and wellness. What are your thoughts on how those two things interrelate?
Well, I think we've learned the hard way, thanks to the pandemic, that for a long time people were burning out just in the daily lifestyles that we had. And I look to my UK experience, where you're commuting into the office 5 days a week. You're on trains, you're on buses, you're walking, whatever it is. Then you still got to go work behind a desk. Using screens probably all the time, whether on your phone, your iPad, your laptop, or whatever you're doing, as you do whatever you're doing, and not realizing that you're tiring out your eyes, your body. You and I stand a lot. Well, not that I think you're standing right now, but
I know. I usually don't first thing in the morning.
No, sure. And my wife is still sort of, I call the old style, where she sits behind a desk all day. And I can see when I walk in at 5 o'clock, she's hunched so far forward and her head is tilted back. And then she says her neck is sore. I can tell you why your neck is sore, because you sit in the most awkward position when you work. And you're tired because of all those things, not because of that. And I think that's where the tools should help. We've talked about Apple Watches and Aura Rings and all those things. But, one of the things that we were talking about with one of the companies was actually having the pop-up on the screen to tell you to go and have a break, specifically around all these back-to-back meetings and all that stuff, because even before the pandemic, because, we could see in the calendars that who was on calls and who wasn't on calls. And you could say to someone, you need to actually go and have, take a 10-minute break here because you've been back to back to back. Go do some stretching, go whatever it is, because it's just not healthy. And I think that's, I haven't been in a corporate environment for a while, but I'm still having those conversations with people where they're saying that they need breaks and they need they need to take a hard look at how many meetings they're in, and how many things that shouldn't be meetings but could actually be an instant chat message or a one pager. That sort of thing.
There was an image that went viral. I saw it on LinkedIn last week, and I don't know what the original source was, but it was a calendar, like it looked like a meeting calendar invite, and then it had the cost of the meeting by, whatever the salary was per person broken out for the time, and then it had like the total cost of having all those people in the room and on a meeting. And that spurred a lot of discussion around if we had something like that and everyone could see the true, cost of having all these calls and inviting everyone, it would change our behavior. So I do think there are ways that technology could, like that, I don't know, the technology helping to govern the use of the technology by helping people see when there are, sort of issues like that.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't actually answer your question now that you've mentioned that piece. And then that is a big thing I kind of answered, but I didn't bring the money into it. But, we're doing quite a lot of work around our return on value calculations using the data we're collecting and seeing. And there are some very scary numbers when you look at some of these things. And I'll go back to my cognitive load example that came up. If you work out, and every company will have an average hourly cost for an employee in their business, which would be the blended value. And then let's use a simple number. Let's say it's $50 an hour. And you take into account that that freeze issue that I had cost me half an hour. 5 minutes to sort the problem out, but 25 minutes to get back into the flow. So that's already $25 lost for the day. And you're having those recurring. So in a 40-hour week, for $2,000 a week, give or take, and you're taking off for this issue. Let's say it's happening 5 times in the week. That's 2.5 hours, 125. That cost will add up, especially if you have an employee base of 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 200,000. If they're all having those problems, and that's where the real return on value ROV comes into it, because you're looking at the more people you have, the greater number of scenarios you have to find return on value. So we're having a discussion with someone where they were saying, well, we don't really care about the application faults for that application because we can't really justify the value. And esoterically, I can agree with that, because that application fault is not necessarily impacting the user because they don't see it. So I can't remember what the thing was. But what I said to them is, but you've got data that machine has been impacted by this thing crashing one way or another. Because when it crashes, it's got to write the entry to the event log. When it crashes, it might be interacting with something else when it crashes, or something else is causing it to crash. So you actually don't know what the problem really is. So you have to go and investigate every crash that you're seeing, because it's the number one list on the list. So there's definitely something going on. You need to go find out what's causing it. Now, let's say it's usually something like this. It's usually a security product that's causing it, some sort of data leak protection, or heuristic product that's looking for malware or something like that could be conflicting with it. Now, whilst the user may not be impacted, what might be happening, and you'd have to look at each machine, but what you might see happen is the antivirus or the anti, I can't remember the name of the products in what they call them, but that product might use more resource, like a CPU resource, because it's trying to address or detect what the problem is, which is causing that crash. So you actually are impacting your user. Now, if you took a 10% value, which is kind of what commonly works out, so go back to our 2,000 dollar a week cost, and you found a 10% improvement for your user base, that's $200. $200 for 10,000 users is, I want to say 2 million, but that's a huge number. Now, if you don't do anything about it, that's $200 for that 10%. Now, if that problem, that application fault, is resolved, you might get back not necessarily $200. You might get back $5 or $10. But then you go to the next one on the list, the next one on the list, the next one on the list. Now, you've got to prioritize these things somehow. Now the quantity might be the way that you prioritize it, but you might also prioritize it based on what kind of application it is. So if the application that's faulting is Teams, for example, you give that all the attention in the world, because that's probably the most used tool in the business right now, even probably higher than Outlook. And if it's not Teams, it'll be something else like that. It'll be Zoom, it'll be WebEx, or whatever it is. So those have to work. And then you'll see, then the value is easy to articulate, because you can say, well, if you can't use Teams and we don't have a backup, that's the entire business that can't do collaboration. But then it's that $2,000 becomes not a loss of 200, but a loss of 2,000 times by, whatever the number of employees is. So I think those return on value conversations, and then it doesn't matter about the technicality though. It's a commercial thing to say, well, we need to invest X amount of resource to investigate these problems, to bring stability to the environment. And that return on value is easy to justify, because you should be looking at a prioritized list of applications. The other thing to be aware of or concerned about is the compliance piece to that. Is there software advice that should be there or shouldn't? And if there's stuff that shouldn't be there, you need to get rid of that stuff. Not only will you save money and get some money back from the licenses you should be getting back if you're removing software you're not using, but also any software that you have, and go back to the application fault that no one's seeing. If that piece of software is sitting there and it's got a vulnerability and you haven't removed it, you've opened yourself up to an attack vector, which is probably not even a known attack vector, because no one's using the software, so you don't know to keep it up to date. It's kind of lost in the minutiae of aggregation. But also, when you start looking at compliance and saying, well, we'll only run this version of Chrome or this version of Edge or this version or whatever it is, anything below that needs to be upgraded or replaced. You start patching the environment correctly, you start getting to a desired state, which is actually the objective. And the desired state should provide the best platform for the end user to do their job, but also in a secure way, in a performant way, in a stable way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of times it comes back to not having that insight, of course. As we know, if you don't have the data to find those things, or to discover what application versions are in your environment at scale, then you don't know what you don't know. But
data's but you need but that data has to be turned into information, and that information has to be, you have to know what to do with that information. So I have a few conversations with a few people, and they're like, well, that's great, we got this telemetry data, we've got all this other data, but we just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And there's mechanisms and frameworks on what to do and how to approach it. And some of it, none of it's rocket science. This is actually pretty straightforward, sensible approaches to things. But it does require a level of asking some questions and understanding the environment and understanding what's important, and tying it back to objectives, and what the business sees as priorities as important, and then mapping that to common, I don't want to say common use cases, but there's definitely plenty of things you could be doing which should be consistent across every company. I mean, disk cleanup is probably the most obvious one. The second most obvious one is restarting machines on a regular basis. Every sort of 2 to 4 weeks. There's definitely benefit in doing that. And then you get into application specific stuff. How do you manage Outlook on the desktop? How do you manage your core line of business applications? Browsers. How do you manage browsers and keep them in a good state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think some of that is where intelligence also comes in terms of how software can be helpful. But it's definitely also just going for those, as you say, well-known, high-value places to start digging in.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of the end user, the end user on average is more sophisticated now. They're more technology. So they have to be part of that solution. So you can have the scenario, which is what the problem is, running out of disk space. That's the problem. But then you can have those recommendations, which are, run the automation that clears out all the things, remove the applications that are unused, whatever it is. But the user needs to be part of that, because you can go remove an application they're not using. And this goes back to behavior economics. If they are using Microsoft Project, for example, and they've used it once, and then you use your data and you say, well, you haven't used this product in 3 months, can we take it away from you? Behavior economics will be, well, I actually want it there because I might use it again because I've used it once. And they need to understand that, well, by keeping this product, here are the ramifications. 1, the product will take up space. 2, it's now an attack vector because we have to keep it up to date. And if we don't keep it up to date, then if there's any vulnerabilities, it'll be a doorway to chaos. Also, there's a cost associated to this. So when we do our true up with Microsoft, they're going to charge us for the license for you having Microsoft, and that could be, could be nothing in the sense of monetary value. But again, coming back to the 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 user base, if everyone's got Project installed, let's say it's $10 a user per month, that becomes a really big number really quickly. And that's where, trying to bridge the gap between what is actually a technical problem or technology problem, which it actually really isn't, to a commercial business problem, which is what it really is, and a risk problem is fun.
Yeah, sounds super fun. But no, it's interesting stuff. Unfortunately, I do need to run, but great chatting as always.
Always, yes. Cool. We'll chat later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.